Hey crew, it's Ben, and I'm back with another Bible study. Today we're going to be diving back into the book of First Samuel, and I always start these Bible studies off by saying I hold some unconventional beliefs, right? I'm looking at this in an unconventional way, and we want to emphasize that today because today we are dealing with David, and I want to make sure that everybody that's here knows that I have some unconventional beliefs. Now, I look at this a little bit differently than most people do. So, if you are uncomfortable with people questioning the things that are in this book, this is not the place for you. If you are uncomfortable with hearing uncomfortable truths, this is not the place for you. But if you are unhappy in your place where you are and you're searching for more knowledge and possibly some explanations, this might be the place for you. So if you fall into that latter bit, I would recommend you start in Genesis because it can be hard to keep up just jumping in Samuel. It's a long slog, I understand. So if you just want to hang out, and for those who have been here, today we are going to be in First Samuel chapter 16 because we left off in 15. And in 15 we saw how Saul upset God by doing what God asked him to do to the best of his ability. And so today we're going to see the aftermath and the effects of that begin to take place because God doesn't do his will immediately. He drags it out over an extended amount of time to make sure that everybody appreciates the gravity of the situation. So when he curses the king, he lets him rule for another 42 years before he brings in a new one in a long drawn out process. And so now we're going to talk about David. So let's get into the text. Now the Lord said to Samuel, how long are you going to mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem, for I have selected from his sons a king for myself. How can I go? Samuel asked. Saul will hear of it and kill me. So they parted ways and they never met again. We got that in the last part, but Saul's going to kill him, huh? This is a man of God who is so frightened of the man that he chose out to be the king that he won't even go and do what God tells him to do. But he's the man of God? Okay. And the Lord answered, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice for the Lord. So, subterfuge. And then invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you are to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate. So Samuel did what the Lord had said and went to Bethlehem. And when the elders of the town met him, they trembled and asked, do you come in peace? Because everybody knows that there's beef, right? Everybody knows that Saul wants to kill Samuel. So the whole town turns out, and the elders of town, right? And they tremble and ask, do you come in peace? In peace, he replied, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. And when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab, and he said, surely here before the Lord is his anointed. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not see as man does. For man sees the outward appearance, but the Lord sees the heart. And then Jesse called Abinadab and presented him to Samuel, who said, the Lord has not chosen this one either. And next, Jesse presented Shammah, but Samuel said, the Lord has not chosen this one either. And then thus Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel told him, the Lord has not chosen any of these. And Samuel asked him, are these all the sons you have? There is still the youngest, Jesse replied, but he is tending the sheep. Send for him, Samuel replied, for we will not sit down to eat until he arrives. And so Jesse sent for his youngest son and brought him in. He was ruddy, with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance. And the Lord said, rise and anoint him, for he is the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And then Samuel set out and went to Ramah. Okay, so Samuel goes through subterfuge to choose out the new king. Because God has told him choose out a new king. And that's what a man of God is going to do. He's going to go and be sneaky and try to find someone. And this time he's not looking for the biggest one because that did not work out for him quite as well last time. So this time he's looking for a characteristic that is old. The characteristic that has been shaped or shared by many people, and he probably knew about it before he got to Jesse, but this ruddy, it's used elsewhere. It's used to describe Esau, which, if you don't know, was the rightful heir, the rightful birthright of Jacob. And so it's used to describe him. And we have seen several instances where the bloodline has gone outside of itself in order to intake something that helped it achieve its goals. That has been characterized by a bright countenance. It has been characterized by red complexion. And so Moses had this, and now we see it here. David doesn't look like everyone else. Everyone else is a fairly shade of brown, right? Like everybody's a shade of brown, but some people are a little bit darker brown than others. The people in this particular area is kind of like a mahogany. Well, not quite as dark as mahogany, maybe a teak, or like they're sandy brown. They're not like dark brown. But this guy stands out. He's kind of reddish. He's marked out as different. And so this is who Samuel was looking for, because this characteristic seems to stand out. There may be a correlation here with albinoism, right? Because people who are albino tend to have a reddish tint to their hair. Like it's a blonde, but it's like a very strawberry blonde. And sometimes their eyes, and sometimes they're like there's more of a red depending on the ethnicity of the albinism, right? And so there may be a correlation there. I don't know. I would not ever judge somebody based upon the skin that they were born in, because God made your skin. But there are things that mark people out, and maybe that is one of them. I don't know. I don't know that many people with albinism. Like I've met maybe one or two in my life, and not like on a close friend relationship, so I can't presume to know anything about them, right? But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or height, for I have rejected him." And they're still the youngest to rise and anoint him. He's the one. So Samuel takes the oil and anoints this guy as king in the presence of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. Well, hallelujah, we got a brand new king. This guy needs to go and take the throne right now. He should be setting forth right now to take the throne. But that's not nearly what happens. Like, that's not even close to how this happens. The guy that God picked, the guy that was chosen out by God to lead Israel, right? God says, how long are you going to put up with Saul? Go choose me another king. And so he goes and chooses another king. But when do we get that king? When does that king pop up? It's going to be a hot minute, y'all. And David served Saul. And after the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, a spirit of distress from the Lord began to torment him. And Saul's servant said to him, "Surely a spirit of distress from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord command your servants here to seek out someone who can skillfully play the harp. And whenever the spirit of distress from God is upon you, he is to play it, and you will be well." And Saul commanded his servants, "Very well. Find me someone who plays well, and bring him to me." And one of the servants answered, "I have seen a son of Jesse in Bethlehem who knows how to play the harp. He is a mighty man of valor, a warrior, eloquent, handsome, and the Lord is with him." So Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send me your son David, who is with the sheep." Okay. So here we have what I was just talking about. Somebody set apart, the man of valor, right? How is he a man of valor? He's a kid. This is pre-Goliath. This is before that. He is a kid. Now, he has been out in the fields tending sheep by himself. And apparently he gets left out there by himself to do it while everybody else goes to town. And now this kid who is left in the fields all the time, like he was left there while Jesse and all 7 of his other brothers went and to this thing. He was left to tend. And so this kid who is not included in the going to town stuff, well, he's known to play the harp very well in town. Okay, maybe when he came into town he was playing the harp. He wasn't watching the sheep. I don't know, maybe he was just that good. Maybe he was playing the harp and watching the sheep. I don't know. But it's very coincidental. I'll give you coincidence because God is the coordinator of coincidence. But this is one of those stories that just doesn't make that much daggum sense. Because you're telling me that out of all of Israel, the best harpist is this kid playing for sheep in the wilderness. And not only that, right? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. But so now he's like, give me somebody who can play very well. And they're like, hey, we got this little kid. Yeah. And so, but they call him a mighty man of valor, a warrior, eloquent and handsome, and the Lord is with him. But he's the kid out there with how is he a mighty man of valor? Maybe it's because he's ready. Maybe it's because his skin looks a little bit different than others. Maybe he is endowed with a little bit extra something. And so Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, send me your son David who is with the sheep. And Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, and 1 young goat, and sent them to Saul with his son David. And when David came to Saul and entered his service, Saul admired him greatly, and David became his armor-bearer. And then Saul sent word to Jesse, saying, let David remain in my service, for I am pleased with him. And whenever the Spirit of God came upon Saul, David would pick up his harp and play, and Saul would become well, and the spirit of distress would depart from him. Music is a wonderful healer. But it is interesting to note that the king of Israel has requested that this child be his permanent companion, right? Leaving aside any other possibilities, which is not outside of the realm of possibilities, but leaving aside that, he is no longer with the flocks. He is now the harpist and the armor bearer for the king of Israel, after he's been anointed to be the king of Israel. And he says, let David remain in my service, for I am pleased with him. So he is taking over the care of this child. This child is no longer out watching his father's fields. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war at Soka in Judah, and they camped between Soka and Azekah in Ephes Dammim. I didn't look it up. Saul and the men of Israel assembled and camped in the valley of Elah, arraying themselves for battle against the Philistines. Now, it is reasonable to assume this is going to be the Gaza Strip area, because that is where these people are concentrated. That is where the 5 cities of the giants are right there. Goliath is from Gath, and that is one of the 5 cities. So it is very reasonable to assume that it was southwestern Judea bordering on Gaza. And the Philistines stood on one hill, and the Israelites stood on another, and the valley between them. And then a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out from the Philistine camp. He was 6 cubits and a span in height. 6 cubits and a span. Let's see what their reference is here. 9'9". That seems probably a little bit small. I would actually probably put that closer to 18-ish, but that's me just, like, the unit of measure changed, so it gets hard. Like, the cubit is subjective. It went from the tip of the finger to the elbow to the wrist to the elbow. So that is a large difference in how it is measured from time to time. And the Philistine stood on one hill, and the champion named Goliath, he was 6 cubits in a span. So we'll just call it 10 foot, make it even. That's still very large, right? Like it says 9'9", but 10 foot's a reasonable like on the other side we had 15 foot. And so it's not unreasonable to think 10 foot over here. And there have been evidences throughout history of these peoples that have mysteriously just been institutionally disappeared without getting too conspiratorial. Oh. And he had a bronze helmet on his head. He wore a bronze coat of mail weighing 5,000 shekels and had armor of bronze on his legs and a javelin of bronze hung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. In addition, his shield bearer went with him. Let's look up these 5,000 and 600 shekels real quick, too. They have it down here. 5,000 shekels is 125 pounds, and 600 shekels is 15 pounds. That's a very large weapon. Like 15 pounds, like people think of swords and they think 5 pounds, right? No. 5-pound sword would kill you. You would not swing that long. For us, normally, a 1-pound weapon is a reasonable, pound and a half is pushing it, has to be balanced really well. That's 15 pounds is a lot, right? That is 15 times. And so the size estimation and the mass estimation, even with the squared cube law, lends me more than 10 foot. But that doesn't, again, that's not hard math. So the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. Now, I'm assuming that would be the hanging beam, and that's going to be about wrist size. So that's a large size. And Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and array yourselves for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose one of your men and have him come down against me. If he is able to fight me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and labor for us." And then the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man to fight." And on hearing the words of the Philistines, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now, David was the son of a man named Jesse, an Ephrathite from Bethlehem of Judah, who had 8 sons in the days of Saul. And Jesse was old and well along in his years. The 3 older sons of Jesse had followed Saul into battle. The firstborn was Eliab, the second was Abinadab, and the third was Shammah, and David was the youngest. The 3 oldest had followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep in Bethlehem. Because that's perfectly reasonable, right? Like if he's going to be the armor bearer for the king, it's perfectly reasonable that he would return home to take care of the sheep. There are 3 brothers gone, and he's gone, but that still leaves, 4 brothers? There are 8. And so he doesn't have to, and it doesn't make sense. It would not be a reasonable thing to expect. If he is going to be the harpist and the armor bearer for the king, he would be with the king. Like even if it's a commute of a couple of days, because it was not a commute of a couple of hours, regardless of where it was, right? So it was at least a day if you're commuting. And so even that is taking away time. What if the king has to leave and he's gone for 3 months and he doesn't have his armor bearer? Now he's got to get somebody new and train them. An armor bearer is like a squire, right? So either the first part of the story is wrong or this part of the story is wrong, but one of the two is not right. For 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and evening to take his stand. One day Jesse and his son David said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take also these 10 portions of cheese to the commander of the unit. Check on the welfare of your brothers and bring back an assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines." Well, if he was the armor bearer, he would be there. And so David got up early in the morning and left the flock with the keeper, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had instructed him. He reached the camp as the army was marching out to its position and shouting the battle cry, and Israel and the Philistines arrayed in formation against each other. And then David left his supplies in the care of the quartermaster and ran to the battle line. And when he arrived, he asked his brothers how they were doing. And as he was speaking with them, suddenly the champion named Goliath, the Philistine from Gath, came forward from the Philistines and shouted his usual words, which David also heard. And when all the men of Israel saw Goliath, they fled from him in great fear. This is the faithful men, the faithful army of Israel. Now the men of Israel had been saying, "Do you see this man who keeps coming out to defy Israel? To the man who kills him, the king will give great riches, and he will give him his daughter in marriage, exempt his father's house from taxation in Israel." So nobody will take him up. Out of all the people, nobody's even going to go try. But more than that, Saul is not going to go try. Right? Saul is the king. He is the biggest dude they got. That was why he was picked. And Saul, being who he is not only not going to accept the challenge, he's not even going to pick somebody. He's saying anybody. Anybody that can manage to pull this off. All right, somebody, please go and defend my kingdom that the Lord gave to me. And David asked the men who were standing with him, "What will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Just who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And the people told him about the offer, saying, "That is what will be done for the man who kills him." Now, when David's older brother Eliab heard him speaking to the men, his anger burned against David. "Why have you come down here?" he asked. "And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and wickedness of heart. You have come down to see the battle." That's interesting. Like, why would his assumption be that? Why would his assumption not be that he was either delivering the supplies that he is delivering or going to be the armor bearer for Saul? Why would that not be his assumption if that is what is true? "What have I done now?" said David. "Was it not just a question?" And then he turned from him towards another and asked about the offer. And the people answered him just as the first ones had answered. Now David's words were overheard and reported to Saul, who called for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." But Saul replied, "You cannot go out against this Philistine to fight him. You are just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." And David replied, "Your servant has been tending his father's sheep. And whenever a lion or a bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. If it reared up against me, I would grab it by its fur, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed lions and bears. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." David added, "The Lord, who has delivered me from the claws of the lion and the bear, will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." "Go," said Saul, "and may the Lord be with you." All right, so again, I don't put things past God, right? I don't doubt that this kid can use his sling and drive off a mountain lion or a desert lion. Like, I don't know how big their lions are, but I know how big our mountain lions are. And they're considerably smaller than the African lions, but them wildcats ain't no joke. But then he said a bear. And I don't know about there. I don't know the size of their bears, but our smallest bears here are herbivores. Like the Louisiana black bear lives here in Louisiana. And it eats mainly berries and leaves and stuff, nuts and stuff. But if you piss it off, it'll rip a human apart. Like, and that's an herbivore. Now, the ones that actually hunt and eat meat, humans don't really stand much of a chance. There is the occasion where one human, through some supernatural intervention, was able to save themselves and possibly even take out a bear, right? We have the legend of Davy Crockett for a reason, because that's not something most people can do. And some of them mountain men may have done it once. But you can bet your ass they wasn't trying to do it twice. Much less lions and bears. It's one thing to throw a sling, but to take from the mouth of a bear a lamb, that's an effort there. That is an immediately, everybody knows you were capable of some different level stuff right there. And a lot can be said for faith. And it says that he was boisterous, right? He had a zeal. That's a lot of zeal. Not to put it as impossible, but it is highly unlikely. Delivery from the claws of the lion and the bear? Yes. Grabbing it by the scruff, striking it down and killing it? I don't know about that one, boss. I'm willing to take a lot on faith. And maybe the ruddy definition is not red. Maybe it means giant. Maybe he's a big old boy. Because you would have to be a big old boy. There's no way, bruh. Like, faith can't get you that far. I mean, he can. He can. Like, faith can move a mountain. But it would take an awful lot of faith. And the level, the difference between faith and stupidity there would be non-existent. To think that you could go up against a bear and grab it by the neck and pull a lamb from it? Come on, bro. As a kid. Like, not as a man, but as a kid. I'm just saying. Not that it's impossible, but it is highly unlikely that it happened more than once. But if you were making a story, if you were trying to build up a king, that would be a story you would tell. He would fight off lions and bears with his bare hands. That would be a story you would tell. And then Saul clothed David in his own tunic, and he put a bronze helmet on his head and dressed him in armor. And David strapped his sword over the tunic and tried to walk. But he was not accustomed to them. I cannot walk in these, David said to Saul. I am not accustomed to them. So David took them off, and David took his staff in his hand and selected 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in the pouch of a shepherd's bag. And with his sling in hand, he approached the Philistine. Now the Philistine came closer and closer to David, and his shield bearer before him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he despised him because he was just a boy, ruddy and handsome. I am a dog, he said to David, that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he called to David, and I will give you your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. But David said to the Philistine, you come against me with a sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. This day I will strike you down, cut off your head, and give the carcasses of the Philistines to the birds of the air and creatures of the earth. And then the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel, and all of those assembled here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. Now, I told you I don't underestimate the slingshot, because the sling is a very powerful weapon. It was a very powerful weapon of conquest for a long time. When it was talking about the men of valor, right? Prior to this, that Benjamin and their men of valor, they were slingers, right? They weren't necessarily archers. They could have been. I don't know. But that was what set him apart, was being able to do that, right? Now, he's ruddy and handsome, and he's set apart by that. That is something that is unusual there. And I don't know how much of a part any of that plays with any of the rest of it. But this sling probably launches a stone about the size of my fist, maybe a little bit smaller. And it's on a, generally speaking, a 3-foot radius rope. So, like, it's 3 foot, the pocket, and then another 3 foot. So you get a really long stroke off of the 3 foot of arm, the 3 foot of string, and that's a lot of leverage. And if you launch a missile the size of my fist, that can do a lot of damage if you hit an unprotected part. So I don't underestimate that. I don't doubt at all that this boy with this stone could do this. It's the grabbing the bear part that really bugs me. Like, he could hit the bear with the stone and maybe kill it if he hit it just right, right? But to grab it by the neck and pull a lamb out of its mouth, that's just a little too much for me. And so he says that I am here fighting for the Lord, and he's got these stones. And why does he have 5 stones, y'all? Do you know why he's got these stones? 5 smooth stones? Because there are 5 cities of 5 giants. And just in case. Now, Goliath has put himself forward as single combat, but that does not mean that his brothers will abide by that. And so he got 4 extras, just in case. I admire the balls, if nothing else. And the Philistines started forward to attack him, and David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet him. And then David reached into his bag, took out a stone, and slung it, striking the Philistine in the forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So this rather large guy, wearing several hundred pounds of clothing, takes off running. That's a lot of mass coming in this direction. And David takes his sling and hits him in the forehead, and it sinks into his forehead. That's a good shot. Not outside the realm of possibility at all. The only thing it takes in this for faith to do it is for you to have the balls to try it. To be this kid and to think that you can take out this, like, even 10 foot, right? Think of a basketball goal. That's 10 foot. So this dude is that tall. Not counting arms, right? Just that tall. And I think he was taller than that, but just going by this, he was 9'9", which is almost there, right? So that's a lot of mass moving in this direction. That's like a car moving in this direction, like a small compact car. And you launch a brick at it. In the other direction, probably close to, 80, 90 miles an hour? That's a collision. This is absolutely believable. And thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. And David ran and stood over him. And he grabbed the Philistine's sword and pulled it from its sheath and killed him. And he cut off his head with the sword. And when the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. And then the men of Israel and Judah charged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. And the bodies of the Philistines were strewn along the Shaaraim road to Gath and Ekron. And when the Israelites returned from their pursuit of the Philistines, they plundered their camps. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem. And he put Goliath's weapons in his own tent. As Saul had watched David going out to confront the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this young man? As surely as you live, O king, Abner replied, I do not know. Find out whose son this young man is, said the king. And so when David returned from killing the Philistine, he, still holding his head in his hand, Abner took him and brought him before Saul. Whose son are you, young man? I am the son of your servant, Jesse of Bethlehem, David replied. Okay, so what do we have here, guys? Do you know what I'm fixing to say? I bet you do. Consistency. We have a severe problem here. We have a problem inside just what we read today. Inside just here. Because before this, prior to Goliath, he had never heard of Jesse's or his son, and somebody told him, hey, there's a harpist. And he comes and he's the armor bearer. And then, in a separate story, they go to find out who he is because he slayed Goliath. Now, this is the same person, two stories. People will apologize for that. I do not. I say that it's okay because it is an amalgamation of stories. It is a setting of doctrine. It is raising these people up. And Samuel is really where that part of it ends. When we get to David and Solomon, that part really stops and it's a whole new section that begins. And so that's what's happening. This is inconsistent with the other one. These two stories do not line up. They do not match. You can apologize for that, but I will not. I will not say it's okay because of this later. It's okay because I don't take it as infallible. That's why it's okay. It's okay because I understand that this was a history being created by the victors in order to create a nation. And it worked. I don't knock that. But it is not consistent. And if it's not consistent within itself, it cannot be consistent. It cannot be infallible. And so now we get this. Jonathan and David. After David had finished speaking with Saul, the souls of Jonathan and David were knit together. And Jonathan loved him as himself. And from that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his father's house. Well, that's another time that happened. And then Jonathan made covenant with David because he loved him as himself. And Jonathan removed the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic, his sword, his bow, and his belt. And so David marched out and prospered in everything Saul sent him to do, and Saul sent him over the men of war. And this was pleasing in the sight of all the people, and of Saul's officers as well. As the troops were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs, and with tambourines and other instruments. And as the women danced, they sang out, Saul has slayed his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. And Saul was furious and resented this song. They have ascribed tens of thousands to David, but only thousands to me. What more can he have but the kingdom? And from that day forward, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Now this is after he is blessed to become king. And God doesn't just make him king, even though apparently he could be the leader right now. God doesn't strike down Saul in a fit of rage over him not doing what he was supposed to. No. It's a long, drawn-out process between them. And so this begins Saul keeping a jealous eye. And the next day a spirit of distress sent by God came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house while David played the harp as usual. Now, Saul was holding a spear, and he hurled it, thinking, I will pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. And so Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had departed from Saul. And therefore Saul sent David away and gave him command of 1,000 men. And David led the troops out to battle and back, and he continued to prosper in all his ways, because the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that David was very successful, he was afraid of him. But all of Israel and Judah loved David, because he was leading them out to battle and back. And then Saul said to David, Here is my older daughter Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. But Saul was thinking, I need not raise my hand against him. Let the hand of the Philistines be against him. And David said to Saul, Who am I? And what is my family or my father's clan in Israel, that I should become the son-in-law of the king? I don't know. You're the guy that killed Goliath. Maybe you would remember that. Who am I that what is my father family or my father's clan? Like, your father's clan has been set apart. You were given the reward, but your father doesn't have to pay taxes anymore, right? And so you would think he would remember that. You would think consistently that would be part of the story. So when it came time to give Saul's daughter Merab to David, she was given in marriage to Adriel of Mahola. Now, Saul's daughter Michal, loved David. And when this was reported to Saul, it pleased him. I will give her to David, Saul thought, so that she may be a snare to him, and the hand of the Philistines may be against him. So Saul said to David, For a second time now, you can be my son-in-law. And then Saul ordered his servants, Speak to David privately, and tell him, Behold, the king is pleased with you, and all his servants love you. Now, therefore, become his son-in-law. But when Saul's servants relayed these words to David, he replied, Does it seem trivial in your sight to be the son-in-law of the king? I am a poor man and lightly esteemed. You killed Goliath. You have songs about you killing 10,000s, as opposed to the thousands of Saul. That's what he's jealous about. But you're not well known. You're lightly esteemed. Consistency. And the servants told Saul, like, it's meant to show his humbleness, right? This is me being humble. But no, that is false humility. You killed Goliath. Now you can say, I'm not interested in your daughter. You have the capability of that. Say, no, I'm not interested. Now, you can argue the wisdom of that, but you have the capability. You are a hero of Israel. Like, literally a hero. You can't say that you're not held in esteem. Now, you might be poor, because being a hero does not equal being rich. And the servants told Saul what David had said. And Saul replied, Say to David, The king desires no other dowry but 100 Philistine foreskins as revenge on his enemies. But Saul intended to cause David's death at the hands of the Philistines. And when the servants reported these terms to David, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law. Before the wedding day arrived, David and his men went out and killed 200 Philistines, and brought their foreskins, and presented them as payment in full, to become the king's son-in-law. And then Saul gave his daughter Michal to David in marriage. And when Saul realized that the Lord was with David, and that his daughter Michal loved David, he grew even more afraid of David. So from then on, Saul was David's enemy. And every time the Philistine commanders came out for battle, David was more successful than all of Saul's officers, so that his name was highly esteemed. All right, we'll get through the murder attempt and we'll stop there. And then Saul ordered his son Jonathan and all his servants to kill David. But Jonathan delighted greatly in David, so he warned David, saying, My father Saul intends to kill you. Be on your guard in the morning and find a secret place and hide there. I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are so that I can ask about you. And if I find out anything, I will tell you." And then Jonathan spoke well of David to his father, and Saul said to him, "The king should not sin against his servant David. He has not sinned against you. In fact, his actions have been highly beneficial to you. He took his life in his hands when he struck down the Philistine. And the Lord worked a great salvation for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. So why would you sin against innocent blood by killing David for no reason?" And Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan and swore an oath. "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death." And so Jonathan summoned David and told him all these things. And then Jonathan brought David to Saul to serve him as he had before. And when war broke out, David went and fought the Philistines and struck them such a mighty blow that they fled before him. But as Saul was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand, a spirit of distress from the Lord came upon him, while David was playing the harp. And Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear, but the spear struck the wall, and David eluded him, ran away, and escaped that night. I don't know about you, but I am not playing harp for this dude anymore. And then Michal took a household idol and laid it on the bed. Placed some goat hair on its head and covered it with a garment. And when Saul sent the messengers to seize David, Michal said, "He is ill." But Saul sent the messengers back to see David and told them, "Bring him up to me in his bed so I can kill him." And when the messengers entered, there was an idol in the bed with a quilt of goat's hair on its head. And Saul said to Michal, "Why did you deceive me like this? You sent my enemy away, and he has escaped." And Michal replied, "He said to me, 'Help me get away, or I will kill you.'" And so David ran away and escaped, and he went to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. And then he and Samuel went to Naioth and stayed there. And when Saul was told that David was at Naioth in Ramah, he sent messengers to capture him. But when he saw the group of prophets prophesying, with Samuel leading them, the Spirit of God came upon them, and Saul's messengers also began to prophesy. And when this was reported to Saul, he sent more messengers, but they began to prophesy as well. And so Saul tried again, and sent messengers the third time, and even they began to prophesy. And finally, Saul himself left for Ramah, and came to the large cistern at Secu, where he asked, "Where are Samuel and David?" "At Naioth in Ramah," he was told. So Saul went to Naioth in Ramah, but the Spirit of the Lord came upon even Saul, and he walked along, prophesying until he came to Naioth in Ramah. And then Saul stripped off his robes, and also prophesied before Samuel, and he collapsed and lay naked all that day and night. And this is why it is said, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" Well, well, well. That is quite the turn of events. Do y'all remember seeing this last time? It wasn't that long ago that the saying was given us that Saul was said to be among the prophets because he was told to go and wait for 7 days after he had been prophesying, and Samuel came up. And that's why he said, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" right before he took the kingship. So again, we have consistency. Again, we have within the same book, if not, it's relatively close. I didn't go look and see how far back, but I mean, we're only on what, 20? Yeah. And so it's in the first 19 books, or 19 chapters, that this is attributed to 2 separate events. One of which is Saul being made king, and one of which is David running away from Saul as king because Saul, as king, is jealous of what he has told David to do. It comes down to consistency again. It's okay if you're building a history and you're writing a history and you don't need it to absolutely be consistent. But if you're trying to sell me a religion, if you're trying to tell me that God Himself wanted this to be written down, then God Himself would want it to be correct. My problem through this whole thing is that if God was setting down the law, which we are supposed to believe happened, then why was the law incorrect? And it was. Like, you can say what you want about, well, it's justified if God says it. No. No. It is not justified to beat somebody in the head with a rock because they want to gather firewood on a certain day. It's just not. God will not tell you that it is. He just won't. And so it is a consistency error. There are many consistency errors in this book. I know I hold some unconventional beliefs. I know that I step on toes when I talk about these things, but I don't mean to. I point it out simply for the people like me who it was not enough for, and they know that there's some inconsistencies. They know that there's some problems. They're just not sure what they are. Right? I know what they are. Anytime that there's a blood sacrifice involved, you're dealing with the wrong entity. There was never a sacrifice required for you to be forgiven of sin. Ever. And so, if those two things are put together, you're doing the wrong thing. Period. The end. The only sacrifice that was ever required for forgiveness from your sins was your sins. It was for you to willingly give up the thing that was holding you back, keeping you from doing what was right in God's sight. The only thing ever required from you was repentance and a true turning of heart, like truly desiring to fulfill the entire law of God. You know what the entire law of God is? It's really simple. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's the whole thing, wrapped up in one sentence. Now there is the go forth and be prosperous and subdue the earth and be stewards and all of that. That's a commandment. But all that minutia of you can't eat pork, that's bull. It's whatever. There's reasons for it. We talked about it. The main thing to pull out of this, right, is that this is a consistency problem. This is a consistency with the nature of God problem. Because if God is going to strike down a king, He's not going to tarry it, right? It's not going to take a long time. He's not going to say, I'm going to curse you because you were doing this bad thing in 42 years. He's not going to say, I'm going to curse you in 20 years. He's going to say, all right, you have 7 years to repent or it's done. And then that 7 years comes and it's done. And then the new king gets crowned. It's not this new king gets crowned in secret. And then he goes and serves in secret the old king. And then he slays a giant, but then denies it and tries this false humility instead of seizing what God has told him to seize. If he has been anointed as king in secret, and then he goes and he's the champion for Israel. If he had the faith to slay Goliath, how does he not have the faith to assume the kingship right there? That's what should have happened. I know that's me putting on God what He should do, but inconsistency, right? Being consistent. If God is going to punish you, and He's already told Saul He will, Saul has not repented. Saul did not go and fight valiantly. He was not out there representing God. He was not doing the right thing. He was hiding and letting anyone go fight his battle for him, even a kid. And that was perfectly fine. There was no problem with that. That's the kingship of Israel. That shows the glory of the Lord God Almighty right there. That shows how powerful nation that Israel is that their king, their biggest guy, literally the tallest guy in the whole, like out of everybody. He's taller than everybody by a head. He's scared to go. But this kid goes and represents Israel. But he doesn't assume leadership right there. Okay. We'll be back in David again. That will be the next one, Wes. When we come back, we'll be in 20. Hopefully, I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a very complicated topic. I know that I hold unconventional beliefs and that I tend to step on toes. It is not intentional, but I do not apologize for it. The things that I say, I very much feel that I have been led to do. Like, all of this is very much driven by God, the one true God, the creator of all things. And that is whom I serve. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.